We are now recording. So let me do our introduction of Christel Greiner Butchart, and I certainly probably didn't say that exactly like she wanted. Christel is working with the Peaceful Schools NC initiative, and her presentation today will be on the School to Peace pipeline. Christel is very young, but has 18 years of experience as an educator. And she was a Peace Fellow at the University of Queensland, Australia. And that is, Hannah, if you don't know what that means that Christel is really a high flyer. There are 6 Peace Fellow programs around the world, and very few people get selected. So Christel has done great. She leads the Peaceful Schools NC initiative at the Carolina Friends School, and she has done a fair amount of international work in exciting places like Myanmar, formerly known as Burma, and Australia. And so please welcome Christel.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here with you. I would love to share my screen if that's okay.
Yep, you should be able to.
Okay, great. And really just want to say hello and welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to be part of the conversation. I have a lot of respect for the club that you all have created. It's really interesting, and I was learning a little bit more about it. So as you'll see from the very beginning, let me see. The conversation that we're going to be having today is focused on how do you create a school to peace pipeline. A lot of us hear the terminology of a school to prison pipeline as something that we are trying to work against, right? So this is where a lot of our students get pushed out of schools. They might end up dropping out of school, even things like kids getting pushed out of the classroom for misbehavior or for truancy and things like that. And so what's the direction we want to be working towards is to keeping our kids in school, but then also building and working towards peace, which can feel like a little bit of a lofty big goal. But as Rotarians, you all have taken that on with creating things like the Rotary Peace Fellowship. So the image that I have here is actually the logo that we use for a conference we offer every other year called the School to Peace Pipeline. It has a wide variety of presenters that cover a number of different topics that all, I think you'll recognize, these are all things that have to be working simultaneously with one another. There's no one pathway or one avenue, but if within the realm of education in our schools, there are lots of things that we can be incorporating to have healthier school communities that support the students, especially when they mess up. Because as human beings, we're all going to make mistakes, and it's our potential as educators to support our kids when they're messing up. So a lot of this that we're going to talk about today is about mindset. When I put together this presentation, there's so many different directions that our conversation can go, and I'm happy to follow. If you have specific questions or things you want me to go a little bit deeper into, I can do that, and we'll just have to re-navigate our time. So hopefully what I've chosen to include will be useful, and we'll have some time at the end for questions as well. So yes, I was part of class 11 Rotary Peace Fellow. I got to be the class representative, and I just want to begin by saying thank you to Rotary, and thank you to you all for supporting the work of the Peace Fellows. There are over 1,000 of us all over the world, and even the conception of the idea of taking on the question, can we create peace on earth? How would you even begin to do that? And what the really bold ideas of Rotarians many years ago were to empower people who were trying to make change in the world, young professionals that were out of school and had a little bit of experience. So this was now 7 years ago. And as you can see, we're still connected. It took us a while to figure out we could all Zoom now. So many of us were able to hop on a call and connect with one another. And we hadn't done that in, over 6 years since we've seen each other's faces, many of us. So this is a long lasting impact on my life. So thank you personally, but then also thank you just for the impact you certainly are having in creating and sustaining peace and justice and social justice. So Peaceful Schools North Carolina is an initiative that's under the umbrella of Carolina Friends School, which is an independent Quaker school. And as Carolina Friends School, so many of these things I'll be talking about are things that we are just, as a Quaker school, as an independent school, we've been able to do. It's just kind of the water we swim in. But we thought about what's the public mission of an independent school. So we're not just doing this within our own campus, but how are we supporting the wider world of our charter schools and public schools, pre-service teachers? How can we support and meet the needs and the potential of what's happening out there? So that's the role that we take on, and I'm really honored to be able to lead this. At the core, being a peaceful school, or when we work with schools all over, it is all about relationships. Really, it's about the relationships that we have, the relationships that we're cultivating in the classroom among the students, and how do we help them build a classroom community, the relationships that we have with our students, so that we're not seen as kind of a power over, but someone who's there to support them and walk with them on their journey. And then also among the adults, so that we're modeling for them, and that when we come up with conflict within our own staff, that we have the skills to be able to work through that and come back into harmony and have a productive working place. So that also includes parents and families and our connections with one another. So these two images are from something called Student Day, where students from a number of our peaceful schools will come together for programming. I think we had about 80 students at our last one, and this was a program the idea came from schools that I worked with in Australia during my Peace Fellowship. I'm going to start with the beginning, which is our youngest kids. I actually have a 6-year-old who's a kindergartner at Carolina Friends School. I'm going to share with you a little video that the students at one of our early school campuses talked about having a peace bench. And I'm going to let them explain it to you. So I need to stop my share to pull up a different screen here. Okay. Can you all see this video? All right.
Yes.
Okay.
We introduced Nelson Mandela. We talked about Martin Luther King with the children, and this really stirred something in them and had them thinking on how can we solve conflict without, or how can we solve our problems without having to hurt one another. And the bench we had was introduced, and we decided to call this our peace bench. And our children, whenever there's a situation or there's a fight going on, or they have a problem, they come into this area, sit on the peace bench, and talk about it, and see how they can come to a peaceful resolution on their own.
This bench is a place where we come and ask. Well, first we ask the teachers if we can go on in the peace bench in the cubby room, and this bench is for solving problems.
We were fighting over this red blanket because we were cats, and then we said, how about we both sleep on it? Then it's like, there's a bunch of room for 2 people on it.
That looks like a normal bench, but it's actually not. It helps people. It helps people when they're really angry and they can't figure things out. So you would turn out, back to what the normal feeling is. Happy and playful and doing fun things and sometimes hard work.
It is sometimes hard work. Ain't that the truth? It is sometimes hard work. And what we know, and part of the reason I was even drawn to Carolina Friends School, is that we teach a conflict resolution class not only teaching it to the little kids and weaving it through the curriculum throughout, but we have a conflict resolution class that we teach to all of the 6th graders at Carolina Friends School. And Hannah was able to actually join our class this morning for part 1 of an activity I'm going to share with you. So that was very exciting. So I'm going to go back to my presentation here. My favorite part of that video was when Finn said, this looks like a normal bench, but it's not. It's like a powerful thing that they're doing and experiencing. And even when they're talking about it, they know that this is a place that's very intentional. When you want to go and speak with somebody, you are inviting them, you're asking, and you're setting aside time to resolve a conflict or to solve a problem. And I know that as the grown-ups, we need those reminders too. So it's exciting to see the little kids doing it. With 6th graders, since we're online, I could actually take a screenshot of some work that we're doing instead of this being on a whiteboard, but we talk about how conflicts escalate. What are the different things that might spark a conflict? I ask them questions like, how might a conflict get started? Or what do you hear or see when people are in a conflict? We talk about, I know this is a lot to take in, but it's just to show you how we do this as curriculum and you're intentionally teaching conflict resolution. We talk about some language you might hear, how that might feel, what happens when you get other people involved, which is a very middle school kind of thing. If there's, fighting within a friend group to go tell your other friend, who then becomes this big thing, how do you clean that up? So these are very relevant skills for the kids, and they can make these connections, especially if they have siblings at home, and talking about how to do some conflict resolution. And then we have them brainstorm together. It usually takes 2 different class periods. Today, Hannah got to see us do the escalator all the way up, and then tomorrow or next week, we'll do the down escalator part. But the things that we ask them are, what do you think are the steps of de-escalating conflict? And together we come up with some strategies. And my question for them is, what's the very first thing you have to do? And they would say something like, you have to say you're sorry. And it's like, yes, but not that the first thing. Well, you got to listen in a calm way. Yes, but that's not the first thing that's going to happen. The first thing that needs to happen is cooling off. So then we're talking about things like mindfulness and self-care. We talk about the impact of breathing and your brain and what's happening to your brain when you are in a heightened state and when you are back into problem-solving mode. So it's powerful, relevant curriculum, I think. And it helps them. We have conversations with them about boundaries and consent. So this isn't just within the 6th grade class, but as a whole middle school. These are 2 boys that are doing a presentation before their first middle school dance. And this was obviously pre-COVID, but this was last year, the first middle school dance of the year. And you had these 8th grade boys explaining to everybody, how do you ask somebody to dance? What's the good way to ask somebody to dance? What happens if they say that they don't want to dance? What do you do? And they're actually having conversations about seeking consent. And if you ask someone to dance and they say no, that's okay. And not bugging them, or how do you let somebody know that you like them? So these are important conversations that we're having that are lifelong skills that will get built upon when they're a little bit older too. Something I would like to spend a little bit more time with is restorative practices. I'm not sure how familiar you all are with restorative practices, and actually I'm curious just to help my own. I'm going to turn the chat on. Are you all able to respond in the chat? Do you use the chat feature? Okay. Could you just write in the chat for me on a scale of like, on a scale of like 0 to 5, 0, I've never heard of restorative practices before, and 5, I could probably teach this session on restorative practices. What's your familiarity with it? So 2, 3, 3 to 4, somewhere in the middle. Okay, great. Okay, Marie, don't worry. I got you covered. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about restorative practices in education, because this is something that we've been doing more and more with the schools that we're working with. I see a lot of potential nationally. Restorative practices are being implemented, or at least we're trying to implement them more across the country. I think if there's a place where we can really dive in, this is a place. So restorative practices seek to repair the harm that was done. Use circles as a way to have hard conversations. It's a simple process. Sometimes it's simple to facilitate, but you really have to have the mindset of what you're doing, because it's different than maybe how many of us were raised, or the model that we had from our teachers when we were growing up. This might be very different. So it could be a shift in mindset. And you are really thinking about harm and impact, how you may have been harmed or caused harm, and what's needed to repair it. In our middle school, we use the language of mess up, fess up, clean it up. So if you make a mistake, the very first part of that is owning up to that. How do you fess up and take ownership? And then you can take the steps to clean it up. And it can be very transformative as well. So this is a quick little video that just gives a good overview, I think, of restorative practices. And there's really restorative justice within a whole community.
Our world is changing at a breathtaking pace. Social patterns that have long enroll in a graduate course or join us at a world conference.
No. Can you hear that okay? Is it sharing my sound? Okay, great. For some reason.
At a breathtaking pace. Social patterns that have long characterized human life are changing dramatically around the globe, diminishing social bonds within families, schools, workplaces, and communities. But humans are hardwired to connect. Just as we need food, shelter, and clothing, we also need strong and meaningful relationships to thrive. With all this in mind, what is restorative practices? Restorative practices is an emerging social science that studies how to strengthen relationships between individuals and within communities. When put into practice, the effects are profound. In schools, students experience greater safety and sense of belonging, resulting in improved behavior, less bullying, and less violence. In workplaces, leaders facilitate direct communication among staff and address conflict as it arises. The result is higher performance, greater accountability, and effective collaboration. In criminal justice, new options allow victims and offenders, friends and family, to repair the emotional harm caused by crime. Throughout our neighborhoods, restorative practices give regular people more voice in the issues that matter most. In a nutshell, restorative practices is the science of relationships and community. Your individual daily interactions have a big impact on the world around you, at your job, with young people, and throughout your community. How we relate matters. This video was brought to you by the International Institute for Restorative Practices. To learn more, attend our flagship event, Basic Restorative Practices, enroll in a graduate course, or join us at a world conference.
So International Institute of Restorative Practices is I would say the probably largest institute for training. So I completed an intensive course in it, and I'm now a restorative practices trainer, so can lead the introduction courses for other schools, for my own staff, which is great to be able to increase the number of people who have this direct training. Some of the core values of restorative practices are respect, responsibility, repair, relationship, and reintegration. And we'll talk about how that can impact a school to peace pipeline in a minute too, especially that reintegration piece. I love these. These aren't from restorative practice from IIRP, but there's a lot of work being developed out there. There's a book called Circle Forward that is fantastic for educators, that has conversation starters, templates, kind of scripts for teachers with every kind of circle you can imagine. So not just a repairing harm circle when there's been a conflict, but also a circle conversation in connection to the insurrection that happened at the Capitol. You can use restorative practices to have conversations processing events. Or if someone has lost a family member for COVID, you can have a restorative practice circle that brings people together to process. Or even setting our classroom agreements. You know, what do we think are really important so that we can be our best selves in the classroom. So these 7 core assumptions, I think, are really powerful. And I want you to think of which one strikes you most in this moment on January 22nd. Number 1, the true self in everyone is good, wise, and powerful. Number 2, the world is profoundly interconnected. Number 3, all human beings have a deep desire to be in good relationship. Number 4, all human beings have gifts and everyone is needed for what they bring. Number 5, everything we need to make positive change is already here. Number 6, human beings are holistic. And number 7, we need practices to build habits of living from the core self. So in the chat, if there's one that really strikes you, you can write that number. And if anyone would like to speak to why, I invite you to do that as well.
I'll speak to number 5. That really resonates with me because, you know, a lot of times we say, oh, I can't do that or I can't fix that. And really everything we need to make that positive change is here.
Yeah.
We can do it.
Yes.
I can speak to number 3. All human beings desire good relationships. I believe that's true. Your environment and people around you impact you deeply. So you want to be around like-minded people that have, you know, hopefully positive influences. And so that influences every fiber in your life, whether your thought process, how you think of yourself. So it's almost like you're outputting your thoughts onto other people. So you want that reflection to come back to you. So I think 3 really speaks to that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I'll speak to 4. I've always thought that everybody has a spark and that would help the needs of humans, our world in general. And I feel bad with killing people and everything and people who are not given opportunities or kept down because they may have the spark that would save somebody or save our earth. And we lose out when people's lives are taken from them with a knee on their neck or whatever. Thank you.
Yeah.
I chose number 1 because the part about everyone being innately good really spoke to me. I think that a lot of times I'm guilty, and I think a lot of us can be guilty of there being somebody who we disagree with on important things, and we assume that they are bad at their core, or we separate people into sects of who's good and who's bad. And when we do that, it's kind of like we're giving up on those people. And if we do that, it's always going to be divisive. We're always going to have clashes of one side against another. But if we can try to remember that deep down, we're all born good, and it's the environment we grow up in or what we've been exposed to that might give us harmful thoughts or lead us to harmful actions, then we can have sympathy for the others and then can work to find that goodness inside of them again and hopefully have a more unified society.
Okay, this is Doris Wallace, and I resonate with number 5. And I believe that everybody, you know, is positive. And if you want to be positive, you surround yourself with positive people. And then when they start talking things that's not positive, you just remove yourself from that conversation or change it and move on. .
I love hearing all of these. Thank you for sharing. For number 5, it makes me think of, when something hard is happening in the world and we're processing that with the kids. A friend of mine said to me once, you have to remember that any issue that's happening that you feel like helpless, how can I possibly make a change? There are dedicated people where this is their job and they are working around the clock and they are putting everything they have into solving these problems that that we're just seeing from so far away. And then it's thinking about, what are you working on? What are the gifts that you individually have that you're dedicating yourself to? So thank you. This slide I want to share with you because it shows that restorative practices in education, it's not just repairing the harm, and it's not just something you pull out and use when things are hard. Most of it, and actually we want to aim for about 80% of our work, is community building, and it's the proactive. So it's building healthy relationships, it's creating a strong classroom community, it's having circle questions that are fun and that bring kids together. Like, if you could go anywhere in the world, where would you want to go and why? And starting with that question, and then you can get into something deeper, like, what is a moment that was transformational for you? So you're teaching kids, when you're doing this proactively, how to hear one another with their whole self, how to speak their truth authentically, how to step up and step back and say just enough, so that there's not kind of one kid that dominates and other kids that don't say anything, where everyone's voice is valued. And you're building those skills into your classroom community or your school community, so that when the harm happens and when we do need to heal, they're able to come to a circle and they know how to do that. And there's trust, and they can look out for each other, and they know each other. When we think about bullying and talk about bullying, if you're connected with your classmates and something happens to one of them on the playground, even if they're not one of your good friends, if you know them, you're more likely to stand up for them. If you have a connection to somebody, you're more likely to be there for them as an ally. And so you have to build those relationships with everybody. The third one is about reintegration. Restorative practices, if you do a deep dive into it, a lot of conversation is around the idea of shame. And how do you reintegrate someone? Shame is a really powerful thing that regulates our behavior. Everyone experiences shame or wants to avoid experiencing shame. And so it does regulate us, but we all respond to shame very differently. And so a student, for example, that has to be away from school for something that they did in school, or if they need to be in detention, or if they need to be doing something else, if they're going to come back to the classroom or come back to the community, there has to be a way to allow that person to be reintegrated in a healthy, authentic way. That's so that they're not holding and carrying that shame forward, if that makes sense. So reintegration circles are, if before a student would rejoin school, or maybe in reflection of something that had happened, just so that it's a healthy invitation back into the community and an intentional moment for that. So here's another kind of little bit of a deeper one, can just continue with restorative practices. I don't think I'll spend too much time here, but it's things like building identity. So having conversations about identity and knowing one another. It's our classroom practices, setting our agreements together. It's community time and relationship building. This is our social emotional learning and our literacy. And then we can get into, how do we support one another when there is a problem, and the problem solving. A lot of our problem solving questions follow an arc of past, present, and future. So if I'm a teacher and there's a conflict during recess, a lot of times what might happen before I really got into this is one kid would come running over to me and say, blah, 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 this kid just did this. And then I would know what happened. So I would go over and I would talk to that kid about, why did you do what you did? It's a different approach where you start with a reflection and asking students, well, what happened, or what was happening? What were you thinking at the time? Who was impacted by those choices? And so it's a reflection on the past. And then you invite the people to answer questions like, what are you thinking now? and who needs to be in the conversation. And then you're thinking towards the future. Well, how can you make this right? Or what should we do moving forward? A lot of these are just little impromptu conversations that you have. I do it all the time. I have 2 boys that are 3 and 6, and then they, get into arguments or fights, or they're not sharing. And I'll ask them questions like, what happened? And how do you think that made them feel? And, how should we solve the problem? So you can do this. It doesn't have to be a big healing circle. It can be just a quick impromptu conversation. There are little cards that you can order, and a lot of teachers will keep these cards just in their lanyards, where they have their keys or the little, things to get into the school, their ID. And a lot of teachers will actually just keep these cards with them so that if something happens, the question of what happened, what were you thinking? What have you thought about since? And there are other questions for when someone has been harmed. Well, what did you think when you realized what happened? What impact has it had on you and others? What do you need? When you look at these questions, do you notice one question that's not there at the very beginning? It's another W question. Actually, a WH question.
Why?
I'm writing in the chat. Yeah, why? Exactly. Good. Someone else just wrote in the chat too. It's not asking why, because why can put someone on the defensive end. If you ask someone what happened, then you're inviting them to speak their truth and tell their story, and you might have information you didn't have before. There might be a bigger context when you ask somebody what happened. You might get a fuller story and a fuller picture. So it's seeing the good in someone rather than putting someone on a like, what the heck were you thinking? So you're able to access that truth. I know that we are about at time to do some question and answer. Can I just have a few more minutes to just talk about peaceful schools and how we do this with other schools? This is a great video that we don't have time for, sorry. But if you want to see a video of a teacher facilitating an impromptu conversation, I can share this with you for sure. So our mission is to really empower schools to do this on their own, not need us to facilitate it, but to help the teachers to have the mindset to do this on their own. And we work with administrators, the staff, the students, parents, everyone from the bus drivers to the cafeteria staff to get all school buy-in to make some significant changes or to open a new school. We've had a few new schools that have wanted to start with this kind of approach from day one. So we have a number of schools in the area, North Carolina, South Carolina. These are predominantly charter schools that we've been able to, it's been more accessible with charter schools. I wish that there was more accessibility in our public schools. That's a problem we're trying to solve, is how do we really get this into public schools? But the top picture was one brand new school. The teachers are from a school in Greensboro, and they were coming to observe Central Park School for Children in downtown Durham, where my husband is. And one of the teachers on their tour said, what do you love most about Central Park School? And they said, peaceful schools. And so when they came for their visit, we set up a little panel for the students to be able to teach the teachers from a brand new school what this means to them and the impact on them. We also work with universities and working with pre-service teachers, which I love, love, love talking to people who are just getting started in the field of education, because they can be like little seeds that you scatter, from into different school districts and into different classrooms. And working with AmeriCorps recently has been very exciting as well. And then we do a number of things that are more for the wider community, not just specifically with this school. So the conference I already mentioned, the slide with all those beautiful faces were our presenters at the last conference. So much expertise in lots of different ways. And then these are some recent conferences and things that we've offered with Restorative. This one, we did a collaboration with Student U, which is a really fantastic program that supports students in the Durham area. This was right before we went into our COVID times. Earlier this year, we offered one for free for teachers. That was, how do we support our kids socially and emotionally right now? Because they certainly need it. And how do we do that online? and at a distance, and we just need to keep coming back to that one. And this one is actually coming up, and it's not really a workshop, it's more of a space for teachers, called How Do You Teach with a Heavy Heart? Because there have been so many times that we as educators have to take our own emotion, what the impact of this year has been, but still teach the kids and be there for the kids. And so teachers ourselves, we need spaces to be able to not get more tools in the toolbox or more resources, but just be together. So, so those are some things and that we do. So I think I'm seeing some questions in the chat. So maybe I'll stop here and we can just have a conversation. And then I want to leave you at the very end. Don't let me forget to share a poem with you that one of our students just wrote this week.
So Christel, Rotary is struggling, like schools are struggling. We've lost membership. Our members are not as engaged in the process as they used to be. So how are you guys addressing that with COVID? I mean, none of us are accustomed, well, we're getting good at Zoom, but I mean, this was new to all of us meeting in this way. So how have you continued to build community and fellowship virtually?
Yeah. Do you mean with my own students in the classroom or with engaging with other schools? Both.
I think locally, because if we could give our club leaders some tools to enhance the environment and re-engage people.
What I've noticed, there have been lots of things that we're thinking, oh, we could do this workshop, we could do that workshop, we could do these programs with kids. And then we realize people are maxed out and capacity is low. And especially for, that's our audience is teachers and educators. So asking the volunteers that are administrators in other schools and teachers in other schools that are on our advisory committee, asking them to create something right now does not seem to serve them. Adding one more thing to teachers or students' plates right now, it just doesn't seem like what's needed. So that's why the things we've been offering have been just free and what feels like it's taking care of needs. So what's needed right now? How do we meet the needs? And it's been a great time for us to do reflection so that when we are ready, because our programming has just been doing this as an organization, we've been growing and growing, and then all of a sudden COVID hit and it just, stalled out. And even some of the schools we've been working with really intensely, their whole priority needed to change, right? And so doing a restorative justice or restorative practices training, the kids aren't getting into conflicts right now the way that they would be because they're not together. So it just isn't a priority. What's happening now, though, is we're really reflecting on how do we reemerge on the other side of this, and what are we going to need to implement next year, what grants. So looking towards the future, but not trying to do too much right now, has felt like the wisdom of the committee, and that really feels right to me. But in terms of like Zoom kind of tools, there are a lot of great resources out there that teachers have been using, for engaging the kids. It's not the same, but we're getting better at Zoom. Breakout rooms, conversations, letting people just connect with each other.
My dog's barking. I'm sorry. Can you explain the circle that you were discussing?
Yes.
Thank you.
So a restorative healing circle is, this is actually a practice that's not very new. And one of the things, I'm sorry, I neglected to say at the very beginning, was actually just honoring the stewards of the land before we were here. So where I'm sitting right now is on Okanichi land. I invite you to think about and pause and, who were the original stewards of the land that you are sitting on right now? I don't know where everybody is, but having a connection and honoring that this process, especially a circle process, our Indigenous communities and elders have been doing this a very long time, not just our American Indian tribes here in the United States or in this land, but also in Australia, all over, the idea of coming together and having conversations. And a restorative practices circle has taken something called a talking piece. So the idea of when someone is holding that talking piece, that they are the only ones that's speaking at the moment. It's not a conversation. It's not bouncing back and forth, but that everyone has an opportunity to say what they need to say. And when they're done, it gets passed to the next person. Circles are led by queries and questions like the ones that I shared before, but they would be tailored to whatever the circle focus was about. People wouldn't have phones and laptops and sitting at desks at a circle. It would be really just a circle of chairs with some kind of a centerpiece. Over Zoom, that's been harder to do. I've done a few healing circles over Zoom where you really have to ask people to like put the phone away, because if you're texting somebody while we're having the conversation of what's happening, that's going to totally undermine it, so you have to have that recommitment. But a circle it's the format of having a conversation that creates a sense of equity of every voice. When you're doing a healing circle, everyone is there voluntarily. No one's forced to participate in a healing circle if they don't want to be there, because that's not going to be, that could be counterproductive, especially if it's someone who's caused the harm. They need to participate in the healing circle, which means that they would have to have taken ownership that they've caused harm before they would participate. For some people and for some kids, if they're not ready to accept ownership, that's their work, right? They can't heal and they can't be part of the solution if they can't admit that they had caused harm. So there are some kids who that's what we're working on with them, is taking ownership, and it can take a long time. I have some more slides on it, but does that help? And I'm missing some key components of it when I'm talking about it. But
yeah, I'm trying to think how we could use that in our anti-racist. It's an excellent way to get people to talk and to think about what they're saying and stuff.
Absolutely. Having a facilitated circle around anti-racism and anti-racist practices, if you have some queries, that usually there's kind of a warm-up or an introductory query and then some going deeper queries, but it's a great way for everyone's voices to be heard, and to have that equity of voice in a circle, and having somebody facilitate it so that there are the agreements of how we participate in the circle, listen from the heart, speak from the heart. Yeah, I can share some resources with you for sure.
Okay, you could do that later. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Does anybody else have any other questions? This has been so amazing and so opening for me. I hope all of you feel that way. It makes me feel like I want to get a peace pipe and have a nice little circle and talk about things. So I also want to say to Hannah, your mentor is exceptional and you are going to learn a lot. And you're such a lucky young woman to be in this profession. And maybe someday you could be a peace scholar. And Rotary would always entertain that situation for sure. Yes.
Well, thank you. I hope that I have the poise to speak as well as Christel someday.
It will come. It will come. And Christel, I want to give you a certificate of appreciation. We'll get it to you for coming and talking with us.
Thank you.
Yes. Oh, wow. Such a